we see a vast star field, there's a loud bang, an implosion. All the life is getting sucked into this massive black hole, and it grows bigger and bigger. The idea that I had initially was, what if this was an avalanche that gets kicked off and you have all these forest creatures that are running away from it, and we are just caught in the middle of this action. We begin in outer space. We have this beautiful ice belt that is this coral reef-like environment with lots of different creatures. It's something that we should look at like, I could live there.
We try to push it more in a watercolour direction and not plaster everything with brushstrokes. A lot of it is more soft, more broken edges, more bloomy.
Vivian, the art director, she is really good at watercolor. I wanted to use that talent because watercolor lends itself to making space and abstract shapes really well. Before this project happened, we were working on Project Gold with this oil painting style. Simon came up with the brushstroke tools add-on, and we came up with all these methodologies of breaking down a painterly look, then depicting it in Blender.
The fun thing about this topic was that we actually didn't really change much about the brushstroke tools.
We knew we wanted to try kind of a lean production to make it as easy as possible on the team, both studio and development. So trying to talk about technical aspects as early as possible, to not have so many unknowns, launching into R&D and wondering about how things would look like.
We could really benefit from having all that work done beforehand and just pick up from there and use the tools as they are.
The way that we're using the brushstroke tools is more as an additional layer on top of everything to give it a bit more depth, but the main weight lifting is being done by the shading.
Getting the right sense of scale was definitely tricky. Seeing that it actually looks like ice and not like space potatoes. Getting that feeling of cold, even though it's meant to be like a cozy place for the creatures. Bo and Andy iterated over them for a long time. I think that really helped push it even more into an authentic direction.
And we meet Critter. Critter is supposed to be this really friendly, cuddly looking creature. I think at some point Vivian made this big sheet of potential ideas for Critter, like a cross between a water bear, a shrimp, and an axolotl.
That was early on one of the animals that Andy wanted to reference. We also had to figure out how he grabs things, so I think that's where the tardigrade hands came from.
There was something that we had from early on in the concept that the creatures were meant to be see-through, with Critter especially.
Yeah, I thought that would be a cool way to take Critter's point of view, if you can even see his eyes through the back of his head.
The biggest challenge with the character shading was to find the right balance between the transmission and making the characters feel translucent. One of the things that I did was to have some parallax in the texture, so it basically looks a little bit like you can look inside of the character, where the texture shifts around depending on your view angle, which makes it look like there's a little bit of detail in depth within the character rather than just on top of the surface.
The more difficult problem was how the eyelids actually connect to the rest of the face. Critter is basically like a soft gummy bear. All the shapes just smoothly transition into each other. It's very blobby. And the eyelids had this very harsh transition into the head.
So in the end, we'd have to pull down his eyelid, consisting of very few tightly packed edges. I had to make sure that they pull down nice and cleanly and evenly over the eyelid and they don't clip into it. Fun fact though, Critter cannot wink. His eyes are so big and they clip into each other that he doesn't really have two separate eyelids, he just has a uni eyelid.
We had to model the inner body. There's a spine, lungs, a heart, a brain, a bunch of weird little tubes and veins going around in his body.
That is mostly cut from the movie, even though you get a little bit of a sense of what's inside and you see when the glowing food disappears into him.
All the creatures are powered by this energy that is inherent to everything. These little moss particles, kind of space fungi on the ice field, that's what Critter lives off. The yellow lines were really something that Vivian came up with as a design motif for all the creatures.
Andy early on defined that everything that is creating motion in the creatures is highlighted in some way, and I think the yellow racing stripe made that very clear. Then purple was a good counterpart and had this deep sea photography kind of vibe. We mostly referenced deep-sea creatures, which are very weird. They swim in the strangest ways.
The deep oceans are as alien to us as the rest of the universe, and it's crazy that we live so close to that.
There was also spookier references, but those were kind of cut out, so we're left with the cuter stuff.
We had a pretty big selection of creatures, and we had very little time to make the models for it. We just thought, okay, we can keep it simple. Some of them have wings or some limbs. They just need to rotate. They have no other way of emoting. For the purpose of having them in the background, that's perfectly fine.
I thankfully had the luxury of knocking out a few of them that I thought were too complex.
We wanted to have them easily riggable and animatable.
I tried to avoid the ones with too many eyeballs and the ones that had big flat surfaces that need a cloth-like behavior, which would be effort.
But we still ended up putting centipedes in there and creatures that have many eyeballs. Just like with Critter, the shapes of the characters are pretty blobby and smooth.
We made the ice rocks very round. Then you have something to oppose it that's very harsh and unnatural looking. And that's the black hole that opens in space, and all the creatures flee for their life.
The look of the black hole was mainly influenced by the very early paintings that Andy did. They look a little bit too much like firework, so we reduced that. It became more purple, more doomy and gloomy.
For the stars getting sucked into the black hole, that was something that Andy already mocked up, and then I took it over at some point, taking the star brushstrokes and dragging them out, making them longer. As everything approaches that border of the black hole, everything gets pulled into it. The same thing needed to happen also for the background, which was a mix of layering of watercolor textures and some vertex color.
If you've ever seen tardigrades swim, that's absolutely hilarious. They rudder with their arms around and they're not really effective. Critter was supposed to channel that in a way.
We had to come up with rules of physicality where we want these creatures to propel themselves in space. So you try and pick and choose elements from familiar places, and one that is closest to space is motion underwater.
We have a character that is inherently going to be animated on twos, so every other frame is going to receive a new pose. And then at the same time, the camera is moving on ones, but when they push themselves towards another asteroid, on the way there, that also has to be on ones, and the asteroid itself is moving on one. So at some point, he lands on the asteroid and starts being animated on twos. And as he is being animated on this hunk of rock, that rock keeps moving. Then he pushes himself off, he has his own trajectory, and now he's attaching himself to a different rock, and that has the same implications.
There were two modes of swimming for them. They were not supposed to be the most agile creature, but at some point in the story, they get energized and turn into this torpedo.
Publico asked for a reverse spine FK chain where he's able to rotate the character from the neck down. So you rotate the control at the neck and it moves his chest, which moves his butt. The reverse FK was used for the shots where Critter is swimming kind of like, not like a fish, but like a, what creatures swim like that?
Snakes with rocket packs, we called it.
The reverse FK was used later on in the film when Critter is a bit more confident and he gets the energy from the big squid creature.
It's amazing.
They told me to push it, so I did push it. He's being pulled by the singularity, so he's swimming, and then he's getting zapped with energy, and then he's like...
We call our giant jellyfish One. The jellyfish is this mysterious creature. They have powers that go further than any other creatures. I always thought it was a cross between an octopus, a jellyfish.
Andy kept saying tree, tree, tree. He's got these big flower petals on the insides of the jellyfish dome.
Our original goal was to have him basically be sized like a small moon, which is insane. We had to size him down significantly, then through camera tricks, trying to make him appear bigger than he actually is.
Also because of the size. One was heavily leaning into using procedural modeling more to give a lot of those details, especially under animation, because all these little bits and pieces were supposed to flutter and move around.
There are, in general, a lot of repeating design patterns over the entire character. The eye region under the cap is the only place where I actually sculpted the area in more detail and then baked that down into vector displacement maps. With the eyeballs, it's funny because we basically just made one, and the rest are just instances scattered across the entire eyeball region.
The animators wouldn't want to manually go into every shot and animate all the eyeballs open and closed. So what we actually did was, in those few shots where it's actually relevant to have manual control over some specific eyeballs, we replaced them with actual rigs that the animators could control 100%. For the rest, we used a setup with geometry nodes that would instantiate an eyeball all over the place.
If you look at a real-life jellyfish, you will quickly notice the complexity of motion that's going on. For the tentacles, we did animate them by hand. However, we requested a dynamic modifier on top of our animation where we could use an advanced wave deformer that would give us a lot of dynamic control over the tentacles.
There's like some shots, there was like a wave animation that was already there, but you could animate over it.
Simon did more localized deformation where the edges of the tentacles and tendrils were moving individually as well.
They have controllers. If you wanted to have like a big waves, then you can do it by yourself. And if you want to have like a staying in place kind of animation that is just like waving a bit, that was like some simulation over.
So the tendril effects were something that took a while to get right. It had a lot of different layers that are working together. The tendrils basically always emit this energy cloud that the creatures would feed off of. There was an element of having this pulse throughout the character in a way where there's a rhythm to it. It would kind of flow through the tendrils as the characters pass by and then cascade, having the lightnings between the creatures. We also had the arcs connecting them, and in some shots it was necessary to have a lot more manual control over how that looks. There we actually had a setup with grease pencil so that the animators could hand animate the arcs directly.
You basically draw a line and it creates this electricity looking effect, and being able to copy paste it and then quickly adjust to the new thing that you're using so you can always piggyback on what you already did. Then every single frame, one frame at a time, figuring out where is this surge of electricity heading and what are the points that it's attaching itself to.
Right after one has been hit by the sunbeam, Critter is being sucked back towards the black hole, and then all of these other creatures are coming in and they need to interact with each other. It was challenging for multiple reasons. Not only were there 8 to 10 characters that I had to work with, but also making sure that each one of these characters are choreographed nicely so it works with the composition.
We knew that we were going to have a lot of creatures flying around, and we knew that those would have to work on different levels of detail. For that I made a setup that the animators could create just a curve in 3D, then have a parameter to animate the creature along it, also deforming to it.
For the creatures in the back, we animated some swimming cycles. Later we could put them into the path, and then we just have to define how they were going to go and the speed, and you could switch between the different creatures, and automatically was applying the swimming cycle from the original file.
They could just easily control the radius of the curve and the tilt to create some more complex movement. The creature blob that is seen towards the end of the movie with all the creatures banding together was very much leaning on using the same effects as the tendril energy, but there were some additional challenges. It was really the pinnacle of the creature energy that we see in the film, so there had to be some small effects here and there to boost the amount of energy that we kind of see on screen. There were some grease pencil lines that I drew in, little particle effects that then were scattered around with geometry nodes. Some additional effects based on the volume and the arcs that we had.
So Dario Vero, his scores are very classical, very deep and very emotional. The first treatment I did was kind of atmospheric. I needed something that brings it from this indie bedroom producer thing into something that fits the scope of the film. I thought it would be really good to have an orchestral score with a real orchestra that really took all of our imagery and managed to just elevate it and make it more grandiose than we could ever hope for. Working with Sander in general, it's so good. He taps exactly into the brief and he finds something that fits the imagery. In most cases, the first thing that he picks is like, yeah, perfect. The idea with Singularity is that we would not only do a 5.1 mix and of course a stereo version, but we would also do an Atmos mix. It's basically many speakers and many subwoofers firing at you and giving you the deepest immersive experience. You can hear a sound traveling past you and something behind you. If you compare it to 5.1, it's as if you're going from mono to stereo. It's incredible. Enough commercial. What we're always doing here is making open movies.
Working on an open production means sharing things with the community every day, every week. It means that we want to share everything we do, the steps, the trial and errors, and also events.
So get ready for Blender Studios' latest short, Singularity. Really created a magical universe.
We're trying to really push the envelope of what is possible in Blender.
Our amazing team did a lot of tooling also to make everything painterly.
We share everything on our studio website, so everything is available.
And once again, thank you so much to Blender Studios.
Also, something that's very specific about an open project is that we share all the files at the end. And so we actually need clean files, which you don't care about once you've done a project. But it's not the case at the Blender Studio. The shots will be packaged.
It's good to have a cross-section of how the film was made so people can download the files themselves and see how the characters are animated or how the effects were made, how the geometry node setups look like. They can hopefully learn something from it.
Making movies at Blender Studio, it's always a small team doing our best with the ideas that we have. It's really that what a small team can do when they are focused and motivated, and that you trust them to make sure that they are on track, but they also have the autonomy and the freedom necessary to really flourish. I hope that people who watch the movie, they see how much love and care and fun was poured into it.
People can get all that knowledge and assets on studio.blender.org.